Hello everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Gaming in the Wild, a video games podcast about games from the artistic, creative side of the tracks, from indie to AAA. My name's John, I'm your host. I'm a journalist based out in Reykjavik, Iceland, where this evening there is a huge storm outside of the house. It's been blowing all day, shaking the windows, shaking the roof. So if you can hear a little bit of weather in the background, sorry about that. I think if you're a regular listener, you're going to be hearing a little bit of that throughout the winter episodes. I have a house that's actually kind of on the crown of the hill of Reykjavik 101, so we get a lot of the weather. It's going to be with me when I'm recording throughout the dark season. It will be the first winter that I've been recording the podcast, so I'll be working on some ways to try and reduce the background noise a little, but I hope that it sounds okay. It's been a bit of a crazy week. Like most people, I think I've been a little transfixed by the news coming out of the States. So I've been watching a lot of CNN and Sky and flipping between news stations, waiting for those presidential votes to come in. We don't have a result yet, but it's looking good for Biden, so fingers crossed. But one good way to get out of that bubble of slightly hyper constant drama, cable news, has been to play games, and I've been playing games with my iPad next to the PlayStation, just watching the news unfold. I've been continuing to play Assassin's Creed Odyssey, actually, and have managed to finish the game, or finish at least one of the three story strands. I finished the main Odyssey strand, the tale of Cassandra and her family. It took me in total, I think, 87 hours since I started playing the game almost 6 months ago, and I finally managed to reach the end game. So I'll be talking about that at the end of the podcast and giving some further thoughts on maybe the largest game I've ever played in many ways. But the featured game of this episode is probably one of the shortest games that I've played in the last year. It's an indie game that first came out in 2008 as a mod on the Source engine, used by Valve to create Half-Life 2 and all those kind of games. It was re-released in 2012 as a commercial release, and then it was re-released as a landmark edition for the consoles in 2017. It's called Dear Esther. It went on to win several awards and has become kind of a divisive game. It's kind of the ultimate in the walking simulator genre, a term that's often used pejoratively for games where you just walk around. Also known less pejoratively as exploration games, often heavily narrative-driven. And although I'm no expert on the trajectory of the genre, it does seem like all of the games like Gone Home and What Became of Edith Finch and these kind of heavily acclaimed narrative experiences, they all came after Dear Esther, so perhaps it's a game that could be reasonably described as a formative game in the advent of that genre, of which I'm a fan, actually. I've often been a fan of gaming minimalism, of games that tear out a lot of the kind of very familiar gameplay mechanisms, such as violence, shooting, striking stuff, leveling, all of this kind of stuff. I'm a fan of games that really strip all of that away and offer you a different kind of experience, and I'm a big fan of that. I'm a big fan of the video game medium as a place where you can do things that you can't do anywhere else in the arts and culture. And I do think that video games are a fantastic place for artistic, creative projects. As I say every episode at the start of the show, it's exactly the kind of game that I aim to cover on this show, although I do cover a wide variety of genres, and I do admit that all video games contain creativity because they all contain visuals, sounds, and so while I have stretched the remit of the podcast to cover mainstream games and to cover anything that I'm playing, from indie to AAA, my favourite games have often been ones that do push the boundaries, whether that is outwards through kind of radical creativity or whether it's inwards by stripping things back to the bare minimum and offering you a different kind of experience. So Dear Esther is right in the wheelhouse of the podcast, and I'm looking forward to talking about it today. But before we dive in, I would like to tell you guys that I do have a Patreon for this podcast. So if you're a regular listener or you like what you hear today, you can support the show by going to patreon.com/gaminginthewild. There is a $1 tier, a $3 and $5 tier. So from as little as $1 a month, you can support the show and get exclusive episodes for patrons and weekly sale recommendations for PlayStation and Switch on games that I've covered that are available for bargain prices. I got 2 new patrons this week, which was really exciting to me. One of them was anonymous, the other was Matt-esque. You can follow him on Twitter at Matt-esque. So if you've got $1 or $3 or $5 that you would like to put towards this podcast, you're welcome to join up at patreon.com/gaminginthewild, and I really appreciate everyone who chooses to do so. It means a lot to me. So thank you to Matt-esque and my other new patron. And with that said, let's move on and talk about the featured game of that episode, Dear Esther. So Dear Esther began as a research project at the University of Portsmouth in the UK. It was conceived of and written by Dan Pinchbeck, with music by Jessica Curry, and after the game was released for free as a mod on the Half-Life engine, it was later redeveloped by independent games artist Robert Briscoe, who worked alongside Pinchbeck and some other artists and brought it up to the commercial release and the version that we can play today. It's a really interesting game. It starts when you come to standing in front of what looks like a kind of a tumble-down fishing shed on the coast of a Hebridean island. It's an unpopulated island, but like many islands, small islands that were once populated, it's got a rich history, if a small history, and there are buildings dotted across the island that you'll find on your travels. And you start off by walking down the beach. And the first thing that I noticed about this game is a certain familiarity with the kind of the colour palette of it. As someone who lives out in Iceland on a kind of a weather-blasted island in the Atlantic, and as someone that has visited the Faroe Islands and the Orkney Islands on the northern tip of Scotland, this looks right. It's got a kind of a muted palette, like the plants are a kind of rush sort of beige and mossy green and grey, with little dashes of colour and little splashes of colour. And the weather is very, very present in this game. As you walk down the beach, you can see the wind kind of lashing in and you can hear it. And you can see spray coming off the waves and the wind kind of blows it into a fog. And the clouds are churning overhead with sunlight kind of peeking through. And it's really dynamic and very engrossing. And it's just as well because the other thing that I noticed right at the start of this game, as I started to walk across the island, is that there is one walking speed, and it is a trudge. It's a very slow walking speed in this game. I pressed all of the buttons on the controller, seeing if I could get the guy to walk faster. You know, it's usually like you hold in the L3 stick, or you hold down one of the shoulder buttons, and it will make your character move faster in most games. But the only controls in Dear Esther are using a stick to walk around or using keys if you're playing it on a keyboard. And any other button on the controller just makes you zoom in a little bit to see things in the distance or to zoom in on details that might catch your eye. So it's very minimal. I've played few games with less controls. You really do just walk through the experience, and that is your lot. And after the first minute or two of feeling a little frustrated that I had to move at such a slow pace, I actually really relaxed into the experience. The environment is so detailed and beautiful that once you've kind of come to peace with the fact that you're going to be walking very slowly, you realize that this is intentional and that it is made that way for you to pay attention to detail. And it does start to feel like quite authentically like a hike, basically. You hike down the beach, you can walk a little bit into the waves, you can walk through the surf, and there are things that you would expect to find on a beach. There are like knotted fishing nets. There are human trash, like old containers that have had their logos and text worn off by the elements. And there are shells and seaweed and things that I was instinctively wanting to lean down and pick up, as I would if I was out for a walk myself. But because it's Dear Esther, you can just take it all in. But I came to peace with that walking speed pretty quickly, started to look around and to kind of wonder at the game world they've created. Even though it's quite an old game now, there is still something quite special about what they've done with the look of this game. Music drifts in and out at different moments, that kind of piano refrain that you heard at the start of the show, and several different pieces, and they were all very atmospheric and apt. And so once you've settled into the Dear Esther experience, it's going to take 40 minutes to an hour to complete, I think. So it's a relatively compact and short experience, but it's a very rich one. Perhaps especially now in COVID times when we're all stuck in the house, this is a really, really rewarding experience. And the other main aspect of this game is the narration. From the very beginning, it becomes apparent that you are someone who has a connection to this island, who is walking across it in a kind of an introspective mood, coming to terms with something that's happened, some big, troublesome, some kind of destructive life experience. And this is expressed through the reading of a series of letters that all begin, Dear Esther. It becomes apparent fairly quickly that Esther is the wife of the protagonist. The wife has passed away, and as you walk across the island, he is reading out his letters to her. And the actual order of the story, there are points at which narration is triggered as you walk. It kind of punctuates your walk. But the order in which the text fragments come is varied from playthrough to playthrough. And that's something that I didn't realise. I've played through this game twice, once about 6 months ago, and once just yesterday to refresh my memory. And I didn't at first notice the differences until I was talking to my friend Kieran about the game, and he asked how I enjoyed the second retelling of the story. And that was when I remembered that I think he had told me before actually that the game does randomize the story to some degree. And it got me thinking, and there were moments that I felt like I was getting new information, but I thought maybe I'd just forgotten it. And there were moments at which I felt like I had received more information before. So as the protagonist tells the story and reads the letters, he talks about a few different aspects of life. He talks about the island. He talks about a couple of people that have lived there, one of whom is a shepherd who lived there a long, long time ago called Jakobsen. So he tells you the sort of saga of the shepherd called Jakobsen, what is known of him. He also talks about Donnelly, someone who came much later to chart the history of the island. And then he also talks about himself, Esther, and a character called Paul, and his role becomes apparent over time. But he also draws parallels between himself, Jakobsen, and Donnelly. And as you progress through the game, it becomes more apparent that your narrator is a troubled person, that Jakobsen, he sees himself in Jakobsen, living on that island so long ago, and he sees himself in Donnelly, who came later. And he starts to intermingle these narratives in a kind of slightly delirious way. And that kind of style of writing, the kind of unreliable narrator, semi-autobiographical, jumbled writing, cut up with this story that you have to piece together. You have to put the jigsaw pieces together from the fragments that you get, mixed with the cut-up technique. Really gives you quite a kind of intriguing window into what's actually happening in the game. And the game does have a kind of a magical feeling to it. As you walk across the island, you find yourself picking through beaches, you find yourself able to explore kind of tumble-down sheds that have art drawn on the walls that you can zoom in on and look at, diagrams, scientific diagrams, and these kind of organic swirling forms in an iridescent kind of paint. And the walk will take you across a beach with some desolate-looking shipwrecks, and you can go and wander around between the shipwrecks and containers. And as you do so, you may get additional trigger points, so you can pick up little extra snatches of context about the island and about the life of the narrator. The walk will also take you into beach caves and past kind of strange, intriguing monuments, past some sort of standing stones that could be natural or could be remnants of the people that have lived on the island before, or maybe even put there by our narrator. Maybe they are sculptures. But you'll also go down into the kind of the belly of the island, where there is a spectacular cave system that you can walk through with stalagmites and stalactites and shimmering light and pools. And it really becomes very, very meditative. But the voiceover of the game is uniformly melancholic, maybe even maudlin at some points. There were moments at which I almost laughed because it's so kind of melodramatic. But there are also moments that are very, very touching. And there is a kind of an urgency to the kind of the desolate emotional state of our narrator that really cuts through and rings true. And as the story comes to its finale, it comes to a head. And it's just a wonderful piece, this game. It does feel like an artwork. It does feel like an experience that could be shown in a gallery. I have spoken to people that went to see Dear Esther performed. So it has been performed with someone playing the game on a screen with live narration and music. So it has been installed in that way, which is really, really fascinating. It's a game that blurs the boundaries between games and art. And that's just something that I really admire. And I'm really glad that I played this game. There are a couple of things that I will mention as negatives. The walking speed is one, although, as I said, you do become accustomed to it. I was very surprised to find in the PS4 Landmark edition that there is a black border around the outside of the graphic window, which is really surprising. I would have expected it to be remade in 4K if they were going to do it so it fills the full screen. I was also surprised to see that the loading screens from the original are still there. So a game of this size feels like it could be one continuous experience, but there are moments where you slide down into a hole or something and you get a loading screen. Really surprising, a game of this length. It does feel like it could have been made into one continuous walk. But other than that, it is a truly wonderful game. Very highly recommended from me. At the time of writing, it is just £2 on the PlayStation Network. I think it's £6 when it's off sale. It's also on Steam. I think it might be on PlayStation now. It's on Xbox. It's kind of available everywhere at this point. So for a 1 hour experience that is a one-off, and if you have any interest in the boundaries between art and games and in the walking simulator narrative experience genre, it's a must play. That's Dear Esther. So as I said earlier, other than a playthrough of Dear Esther, most of my gaming time has been taken up by playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, which I did talk about a while ago. And I think I talked about it in more glowing terms originally than I think about it now on the other side of the experience after all of those hours, tens of hours of gameplay. I do feel like, in retrospect, that it's a really cool game, and the way that they have handled the creation of a virtual ancient Greece is outstanding. But it feels front-loaded in a way. I think the first several islands and regions that you explore as Cassandra and the early trajectory of the story is fantastic. I'd say for the first 20 or 25 hours, it's kind of a joy actually. But as I moved through the game, it has a very extended mid-section in which side quests are intermingled with the main story. So there are times at which you might be dying to just forge ahead, but you are forced to do a kind of a bunch of errands, basically, to kind of get characters to do what you want and to show you the way forward. And things also become a little repetitive after a while in that classic Ubisoft style. So at first, I'd say the first 20 hours of the game, you're constantly being introduced to new mechanics, like it takes you a while to get hold of a ship, and then you can pilot that thing, you can sail that thing around the islands, and you can upgrade all of your different systems and weapons, and you can kind of move on through kind of your first fort raid and your first kind of regional conquest and all of these different mechanics of the game, and it all feels very fresh, and it feels like it's not repeating itself, and these things come intermingled with story trigger events that kind of move things on. But after the 20-hour mark, you've seen them all, and so from 20 through to 80, that's a further 40, 60 hours of gameplay. You're doing those same things again and again and again. And it is fun, like it is addictive. I did play through it, I didn't stop, it was enough to keep me going. But at some points it started to feel like endurance gaming. Kind of like a game that you might put on occasionally to relax, like a puzzle game on your Switch. I mean, I actually use the game Yoshi's Crafted World for that, because you don't really have to kind of memorize a lot to play Yoshi's Crafted World. You can just fire it up occasionally, sit back, play a few levels. It's really light and fun, basically. It's like a background game. And Assassin's Creed Odyssey becomes so repetitive that it's that kind of game. It's like you can fire it up every now and then, take over a few forts, run around an island, and then leave it alone again. But I mean, I wanted to get this game finished before year end. I've got a few big games that I really want to get done. I really want to work my way through Red Dead Redemption 2, which I have been doing and really enjoying. I think perhaps playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey next to that game highlighted the flaws of Assassin's Creed Odyssey more than I might otherwise have seen them. Because Red Dead is, I would say, the pinnacle of open world games of this type. The structure of missions that you'll get in Red Dead is so organic, and the characters are so well voiced, and the story is so well done. I mean, I'm halfway through Red Dead Redemption 2 now, and I'm a little bit in awe of it. It has this sort of simulation mechanics where you can kind of, you can do everything. You can kind of trim your character's hair, and you have to feed your horse and pat it, and you have to brush it occasionally if it gets dirty. You have to look after your kind of core endurance and things like this by eating food, catching food, cooking food. All of this different stuff feeds in to a very real feeling experience. Assassin's Creed Odyssey is not that. You run around, you are kind of a superhero basically in that one, and you start to feel like one by the end of it. You have so many abilities that you can kind of march in the front door of a fort, fight 30 people, walk out 5 minutes later with all of their stuff, with unruffled hair, and then run on to the next one. It's a very different proposition. But I'm slating it, and I did enjoy the game. I am going to finish the 2 other forks of the story. I think some of the highlights of Assassin's Creed Odyssey have been moments when unexpected stuff happened. So once the kind of vaguely monotonous gameplay loop has kind of revealed itself to you, there are still moments that will shock you. Like I think I encountered a couple of mythical creatures that really made my jaw drop because they come so suddenly and they are so at odds with the repetition that you've been experiencing for hours and hours and hours. It's just something completely different. So those are quite startling gameplay events. They have been really good, and I think there are some more of those to complete in the kind of the more mythical strand of the story. So I'm looking forward to that, and I think I will go through and do it. I'm not that far from the true end of the game now, I think. I've completed the family saga, and now I'm going to complete the mythical strand. I mean, I do also feel in that game, just to finish that thought, that after the halfway point, the landscape feels needlessly big. You have a hawk in that game, and you can kind of use the hawk to scope out the area, and it will tell you when you're near something interesting. And some of the islands and regions in the late game, there really isn't much there. You get the feeling that this landscape hasn't been populated because it wasn't really necessary for the game. But, on the drawing board, this game had, 20 islands and 5 huge land masses for you to explore. But it seems that as they populated the game and played out the story, they kind of ran out of things to put in this landscape. I mean, I did tweet out one tweet in which I said there was a moment at which I had to travel across an entire landmass. So I got on the horse, set the marker, and then clicked go to target. And then I literally went downstairs, made a cup of tea, came back, and Cassandra was still riding on the horse. So that's, 3 or 4 minutes where I would have just been sitting here, looking at the TV. So it's too big. I think that's a fair criticism, and one that has been levelled at the game. It's way too big. There's too much of everything, which feels perverse to me in a way. It's perverse to have played a game, enjoyed it, and wished that there was less of it. But, it's like seeing a film that you really enjoyed, but it could have lost 2 hours in the editing room and been shorter and better. That's Assassin's Creed Odyssey. Other games that I've been playing a game called Roki. It's an indie game on Switch. I'm going to be reviewing it for Switch Indie Fix, the indie game website. It's a really fun sort of point-and-click adventure based on Nordic mythology. I think it might be Swedish, kind of forest fairies and demons and the things that live deep in the woods. So I've been enjoying that one. I'm looking forward to getting through to the end of that one and writing my review. Switch Indie Fix has published a couple of my other reviews recently of I Am Dead and Falcon Age, so you can read those on the website if you're interested. They got a 5 and a 6 out of 10, so fairly enjoyable games. I'll be playing Roki across the next week and finishing up my review for that one, so I'm looking forward to that. I did also pick up a couple of games on the current PlayStation sale that I'm excited about. The Talos Principle, a game that's in that kind of artistic puzzle game genre that I really like, alongside Portal and Superliminal and these kind of games. And what else did I get? I bought a shoot-'em-up called Nex Machina that's been on my mind for a while. And I also got a game, what's the last one called again? Never Alone it's called. It's based on Greenlandic mythology, and it's kind of a cute-looking platform game. And these games are, I think, at full price, £15-20 each, but they were all £3 each, so I just swept them all up, downloaded them all. I'll be playing those games across the next weeks too, so perhaps the next episodes will feature some of those games. So that's our episode. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed hearing about Dear Esther. Really recommend that game. Also Assassin's Creed Odyssey. I'm glad to be at the end game of it now. And getting back to Red Dead Redemption 2, which I'm looking forward to. I needed a break from it, so I switched lanes over to Assassin's Creed Odyssey. But I'm really hoping to have those two finished by the year end. I'm really enjoying those big meaty games as the weather turns bad. And with the lockdowns and stuff, it's good to have these things to get your teeth into. I will finish by saying that if you'd like to see what I'm playing, talk to me, tell me what you're playing too, you can find me on social media as Gaming in the Wild on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube and Twitch. I'm always meaning to stream the games that I do the podcasts about, but I haven't gotten around to it recently. But I will try and get back to streaming. I'm mostly on Twitter, so please do come and look me up there. You can see all the different games that I'm playing, get video clips and screenshots and jokes and just chats with the really cool Twitter gaming community. Obviously there is also the Patreon, so if you've enjoyed this episode, patreon.com/gaminginthewild. Other than that, thank you very much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I'll be back next week with a new one. Take care of yourselves and each other. Bye-bye for now.